In the heart of Appalachia, Raleigh County, West Virginia, is the kind of close-knit region where reputation matters as much as money. For nearly 2 decades, Michael Brandon Cochran and his wife Natalie built a life here that, from the outside, looked completely ordinary, successful, and enviable. Michael, born in 1980, was a well-known local figure, a former powerlifting competitor whose identity was deeply rooted in physical fitness, youth sports coaching, and fatherhood. Natalie, a licensed pharmacist, carried immense professional weight in their community, granting the couple instant credibility wherever they went. By 2017, the family expanded their horizons into entrepreneurship, with Natalie launching Tactical Solutions Group, a venture presented as a high-profile military contracting firm. The couple owned multiple homes, took lavish international vacations, and collected luxury assets, embodying the ultimate local success story. They were considered the perfect couple by those who knew them. Yet, beneath the glittering facade of wealth and community respect, a dark and catastrophic reality was quietly festering within the walls of their Daniels, West Virginia home. Before we dive into the dark web of lies that destroyed an innocent man's life, take a quick second to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. We break down the most chilling true crime investigations every single week, and you won't want to miss our upcoming cases. Now, let's step into Raleigh County, West Virginia. The timeline of deception reached a critical flashpoint between 2017 and early 2019. During this window, Natalie Cochran constructed a massive multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme, siphoning exactly $2.5 million from close friends, neighbors, and family members under the guise of her military contracting business. However, by January 2019, the financial walls were rapidly closing in. Michael Cochran, entirely blind to the illegal nature of the business, but aware of growing administrative friction, began asking highly specific, urgent questions about missing corporate funds and major accounting discrepancies. To pacify his growing suspicion, Natalie engineered a final, desperate stall tactic. She scheduled a private charter flight for the morning of February 6, 2019, explicitly telling Michael they were flying to a bank in Lynchburg, Virginia, to audit their government contract funds and secure their wealth. Michael was visibly excited, believing this trip would validate years of hard work. But Natalie knew the Lynchburg bank vault contained nothing, and stepping foot inside meant the immediate, irreversible end of her freedom. The execution of her plan began silently on the night of February 5, 2019. Natalie contacted a neighbor under the false pretense of suffering from an acute medical ailment, successfully convincing them to provide her with a vial of medical-grade U-100 insulin. Armed with this chemical weapon, her timeline shifted to the early morning of February 6th. At approximately 5:30 a.m., while Michael was preparing for the flight, Natalie covertly sent a text message to the charter pilot, abruptly canceling the flight under a false excuse. Michael was now effectively trapped inside the residence, completely unaware that the trip had been called off. Between 6 a.m. and 8 a.m., leveraging her specialized training as a licensed pharmacist, Natalie prepared a massive, lethal overdose of the stolen insulin. Knowing her husband was completely non-diabetic, she understood with mathematical precision that flooding his bloodstream with exogenous insulin would induce rapid, catastrophic hypoglycemia. Seizing a moment of absolute isolation in their kitchen, she administered the injection directly into Michael's body. The reaction was immediate. Within minutes, Michael's blood sugar plummeted, depriving his brain of vital glucose, causing him to collapse heavily onto the kitchen floor. Instead of dialing emergency services, Natalie began a cold, calculated period of deliberate inaction. For several hours, she moved around the house, leaving Michael comatose on the floor to ensure that the lack of glucose caused irreversible, widespread neurological destruction. She systematically cleaned the immediate area, hid the injection equipment, and allowed the clock to tick down, ensuring that by the time anyone else saw him, the damage would be permanent. How long could such a calculated act remain hidden behind the guise of a medical emergency? The silence inside the Daniels residence was broken only when Natalie initiated the next phase of her narrative on the afternoon of February 6, 2019. At exactly 12:21 p.m., hours after Michael had initially collapsed, Natalie sent a text message to a local home contractor who frequently did maintenance work for the family. The message casually stated that Michael was suddenly experiencing a severe illness and asked if the contractor could stop by the house to assist her. When the contractor arrived at the home shortly before 1:00 p.m., he walked into a scene of absolute horror. Expecting to find a man resting with the flu, he was instead confronted with the sight of the physically imposing 38-year-old former powerlifter lying completely motionless on the hard kitchen floor. Michael was breathing heavily, his skin clammy, and he was totally unresponsive to verbal shouts or physical shaking. Simultaneously, Natalie sent a digital photograph of her unconscious husband to the very neighbor who had unwittingly supplied the insulin earlier that morning, claiming she didn't know what was wrong with him. Panic quickly radiated through the immediate social circle. The contractor, deeply alarmed by Michael's profoundly unnatural state, urged that emergency services be contacted immediately, while terrified neighbors and family friends began rushing toward the residence to witness a medical crisis that defied all logical explanation. When the delayed 911 call was finally placed and local emergency medical technicians arrived at the Daniels residence later that afternoon, the atmosphere inside the home was thick with confusion and unstated tension. Paramedics entered the living room, where Michael had since been moved to the couch, and immediately began an aggressive primary assessment. They found a young man in peak physical condition who was entirely comatose, exhibiting a Glasgow Coma Scale score that indicated profound neurological shutdown. Paramedics applied a painful sternum rub, a standard medical technique designed to elicit a physical response from unconscious patients, but Michael did not flinch, groan, or show even a minor muscle reflex. While the physical structure of the home showed no signs of a typical violent crime, such as forced entry, broken glass, or blood splatter, seasoned emergency personnel immediately noted several glaring red flags. The presentation was entirely inconsistent with a standard medical emergency for a 38-year-old athlete. There was an eerie, detached calm in the home's environment that contrasted sharply with the life-threatening status of the patient. As crew members rapidly loaded Michael into the ambulance, the responding professionals quietly documented the highly unusual circumstances, planting the initial seeds of suspicion that this was far more complex than a sudden natural collapse. Upon arrival at the emergency department, clinical blood panels revealed a staggering medical anomaly. Michael Cochran's blood glucose level was registered at a near-fatal 21 milligrams per deciliter. Attending physicians immediately noted that a level this low is medically impossible for a healthy, non-diabetic individual under normal physiological conditions. This extreme, prolonged state of hypoglycemia had starved the brain of oxygen, resulting in massive, irreversible cerebral edema, severe swelling of the brain tissue. Despite intensive life support interventions, Michael never regained consciousness and was officially pronounced dead 5 days later, on February 11, 2019. Because the death was initially treated as an anomalous medical tragedy, Michael's body was released to the family and buried in a local cemetery. However, 7 months later, federal developments completely upended the case, resulting in a court-ordered exhumation of the body. In September 2019, medical examiner Dr. Pyotr Kubitschek performed the exhumation autopsy. Due to the advanced decomposition associated with the 7-month post-mortem interval, physical tissue examination could not isolate specific needle puncture tracks or measure exact insulin degradation products in the blood. However, subsequent forensic pathology reviews conducted by elite state experts, including Dr. Paul Uribe, focused heavily on the unalterable clinical data from the hospital. The final forensic reports concluded that a blood glucose level of 21 in a non-diabetic male could only be achieved through the external administration of a massive dose of exogenous insulin. With the physiological impossibility of a natural cause established, the medical examiner officially amended the manner of death from natural to homicide. The true breakthrough in the homicide investigation did not originate in a traditional forensics laboratory, but rather within the complex data network of a massive federal financial fraud investigation. Following Michael's sudden death, the artificial foundations of Tactical Solutions Group instantly crumbled. Frustrated and terrified investors, who had collectively handed over $2.5 million in life savings, realized their regular dividend checks had permanently stopped. Desperate for answers, they contacted federal authorities, triggering an immediate, aggressive response from the FBI and the IRS. In June 2019, federal agents executed a comprehensive search warrant at the Cochran residence to seize digital servers, bank statements, and corporate ledgers. During the meticulous physical sweep of the home, an agent opened a storage area and discovered a critical piece of evidence, a vial of medical insulin. Knowing with absolute certainty from medical records that neither Michael nor Natalie suffered from diabetes, federal investigators immediately flagged the item and shared the discovery with West Virginia State Police detectives. The investigation quickly pivoted, merging the financial fraud case with the suspicious death inquiry. The FBI's Digital Forensic Unit successfully extracted thousands of deleted text messages between Michael and Natalie, spanning the late months of 2018 through February 2019. The digital footprint revealed a high-stakes narrative. Michael had actively discovered the financial discrepancies, was demanding to see corporate bank balances, and was aggressively pursuing the truth behind their alleged military contracts. This provided the state with an absolute timeline of motive. State detectives then tracked down the neighbor who had provided the insulin, securing a formal statement detailing exactly how Natalie had requested the drug on the eve of the murder. Forensic chemists analyzed the physical vial seized from the home, identifying distinct needle punctures through the protective rubber membrane. Step by step, investigators constructed a logical case demonstrating that the murder was a cold, premeditated execution designed to permanently silence a husband who was hours away from exposing a multi-million-dollar federal crime. With the financial investigation wrapping up first, Natalie Cochran was formally prosecuted, convicted, and sentenced in federal court to a lengthy prison term for wire fraud and money laundering. However, state prosecutors were quietly finalizing the homicide case. In November 2021, a Raleigh County grand jury officially returned an indictment charging Natalie Cochran with first-degree murder. State authorities traveled to the correctional facility to formally execute the arrest warrant. The transition was stark. The former prominent pharmacist, who once controlled millions of dollars, occupied luxury estates, and drove high-end vehicles, was brought into the state judicial framework in standard prison attire. Throughout the processing, booking, and formal reading of the murder charge, Natalie maintained a completely cold, unblinking exterior, exhibiting the exact same stoic, detached compliance that had characterized her interactions with law enforcement from the very beginning of the financial collapse. Inside the interrogation room, detectives confronted Natalie with the rigid timeline of February 6, 2019, specifically focusing on the massive gap between her husband's collapse and her first message to the contractor. Natalie immediately began spinning a series of contradictory stories. Initially, she told investigators that she and Michael were casually talking in the kitchen when he suddenly lost his balance, fell backward, and struck his head violently against the counter, causing his unconscious state. However, when detectives noted that medical staff found no trauma consistent with a severe head injury, she altered her story the following day. She claimed to family members and police that Michael had actually been resting uncomfortably on the living room couch all morning and only collapsed much later when he attempted to walk to the kitchen. When investigators presented the forensic discovery of the insulin vial and asked why a non-diabetic household contained diabetes medication, Natalie attempted a desperate psychological pivot. She boldly claimed that Michael had been secretly obtaining insulin on his own, injecting it into his lower back as part of an extreme, unverified physical fitness and fat-burning regimen. Detectives immediately recognized these shifting, medically absurd narratives as definitive proof of a consciousness of guilt. Armed with these conflicting statements, state prosecutors Tom Truman and Ashley Accord assembled the official trial docket, relies entirely on a web of physical, digital, and expert circumstantial evidence. The physical foundation rested securely on the punctured insulin vial recovered directly from the home, backed by the rock-solid testimony of the neighbor, who verified giving the exact matching medication to Natalie just hours before the crime occurred. This was tightly integrated with the digital forensic files, which included the charter pilot's log, proving Natalie deliberately canceled the Lynchburg flight at 5:30 a.m., while simultaneously leaving her husband to believe the trip was still active. The prosecution secured crucial expert testimonies from leading medical authorities, including endocrinologist Dr. Diane Carlin and forensic pathologist Dr. Paul Uribe. Both specialists presented definitive anatomical charts to the court, testifying under oath that a blood glucose level of 21 in a healthy adult male is physiologically impossible without the direct injection of rapid-acting exogenous insulin. This complete alignment of financial ruin, verified physical possession of the poison, and undeniable medical data allowed the state to legally seal the file for trial. The first-degree murder trial officially commenced in January 2025, within the crowded courtroom of the Raleigh County Circuit Court, immediately transforming into a fierce battle of medical interpretations. Natalie's defense team took a calculated risk. They openly admitted to the $2.5 million federal Ponzi scheme, but argued aggressively that financial dishonesty did not automatically equate to murder. They posited that Michael's fatal hypoglycemic episode was the tragic, unintended result of an obsession with physical culture, suggesting he had consumed tainted fitness supplements or unverified black market steroids. The prosecution countered with devastating precision. They presented the court with the extracted text messages, painting a picture of a cold, calculating killer who weaponized her pharmaceutical degree to execute her husband, simply to protect her fragile web of lies. On January 29, 2025, following a highly publicized multi-week trial, the case was handed to the jury. It took the panel less than 2 hours of deliberate discussion to reach a unanimous decision: guilty of first-degree murder. The trial immediately transitioned into the high-stakes mercy phase to determine if Natalie would ever be eligible for parole. Although Natalie's mother and children took the stand, weeping openly and begging the jury for leniency, the panel remained entirely unmoved by the display. Returning to the courtroom, the jury officially denied mercy, and the presiding judge sentenced Natalie Cochran to life in prison without the absolute possibility of parole. The final verdict sent massive shockwaves through the tight-knit communities of West Virginia, where the Cochran family had spent decades cultivating an image of elite success. For the victims of the Ponzi scheme, many of whom were lifelong friends, church members, and direct relatives, the realization that Natalie had willingly executed her own husband to prevent the exposure of her financial crimes brought a mixture of visceral horror and deep psychological trauma. Public discourse across local media outlets focused heavily on the terrifying ease with which a trusted healthcare professional could actively transform her medical expertise into a lethal, invisible tool. While Natalie's remaining immediate family faced intense, quiet grief over the complete public destruction of their family unit, the broader Raleigh County community expressed a profound sense of relief, viewing the permanent life sentence without parole as the only acceptable, just conclusion to a betrayal of this magnitude. This case leaves us with unsettling questions about trust and deception. Given that the medical examiner could not definitively isolate insulin during the exhumation autopsy due to the passage of time, do you believe the circumstantial evidence and expert testimonies were enough to justify a first-degree murder conviction? Was the jury's swift decision to deny mercy and sentence Natalie to life without parole the correct choice? Or does any part of this case leave you with lingering doubts? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The tragic death of Michael Cochran stands as a chilling case study in the dark psychology of unchecked greed and the limits of human trust. It forces a grim realization: the greatest threats do not always come from the dark corners of the outside world, but can sometimes sit directly across from us at the dinner table, hidden behind a mask of ordinary respectability. Michael spent 19 years building a life, a home, and a family with a person he trusted completely, never imagining that his compliance and eventual curiosity would cost him his life. This case serves as a stark warning about the destructive nature of compounding lies. When an individual constructs a life based entirely on deception, the pressure to maintain that facade can warp the human psyche to a point where even the lives of loved ones become expendable commodities. The legal system ultimately delivered justice, but it arrived at an agonizing cost: a dedicated father lost, a community's trust shattered, and children left to carry the heavy legacy of a mother's unforgivable crimes. If this deep dive into the chilling case of Michael and Natalie Cochran kept you on the edge of your seat, please give this video a big thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share this video with your fellow true crime enthusiasts. Your support helps us keep uncovering the truth behind these dark mysteries. Thank you for watching, stay safe, and we will see you in the next investigation.